British Transport Police have said that transgender police officers can conduct intimate searches of women so long as they have a gender recognition certificate, according to the Telegraph and guidance they say that they have seen. Now, what this means in practice is that a biologically male police officer who identifies as a woman and has obtained a gender recognition certificate can conduct a more intimate search of women. These are known as more thorough intimate parts searches, or MTIP searches. And the BTP is not the only force to be doing this, as I'll discuss in this video. So first of all, if you like a brutally honest, open and frank approach to the news and what's developing in the world and specifically the UK, please do consider subscribing to my channel. That helps me grow. I am very pleased to say I've just broken through 650,000 subscribers. So that's halfway between 600 and 700,000. I'd love to get to 700, which makes me feel psychologically closer to 1 million subscribers. I'd really appreciate that. But also a caveat to this video. This video is in no way intended, nor should it be taken as an attack upon anybody with regard to their gender identity, or anything of the sort. And I would strongly condemn anybody that do so, because that is not the purpose of this video. But what is the purpose of this video is to talk about the very reality that these guidance, policies, etc. have upon members of the public. And so, as I say, this more thorough intimate parts search by transgender officers because they've obtained a gender recognition certificate is certainly not limited to the British Transport Police, because this is a Apology Pages document from the Metropolitan Police, which talks about searches by transgender officers. And this question here says, what is the policy in relation to transgender officers conducting more thorough MTIP searches? And it says those officers who identify as transsexual, transgender being an overarching term, can go through the process of transitioning, be granted a gender recognition certificate. If an officer holds a GRC, she or he can conduct more thorough and MTIP searches in the way that others can. So as I said, very clearly, this policy is that a transgender officer with a gender recognition certificate can conduct a more thorough search. Now, just to emphasize the point here, this is exactly as it sounds. It is a more thorough, intimate parts search. I can't say any differently than that because of YouTube algorithms, but that is exactly what this policy says. However, it goes on at point 2. If a person identifies as transsexual but hasn't started the process of transitioning, or is on their journey but has not yet been granted a GRC, they can apply for an exemption certificate which will preclude them from carrying out a more thorough MTIP search. Officers who identify as bigender or non-binary or gender fluid can only conduct more thorough searches of those that have the same gender assigned at birth. And in brackets, same sex. Now, this is an interesting point because other documents from the Met Police, one of which is this one here, if I bring it onto screen, talks about a disparity between sex and gender identity that in transgender individuals leads to distressing and painful feelings that are called gender dysphoria. And just above it here, it says, why isn't gender simple? Talks about gender identity, gender presentation, and biological sex, making an important distinction between the two, which will become very important for reasons I'll explain a little bit later in this video, because there's a big court case coming up in a few days' time, which I've spoken about in previous videos, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more again in this video. This document here, again, this is a document from the Met Police, says biological sex is largely assigned at birth, depending on the appearance of genitals. Gender identity is the gender that the person identifies or feels themselves to be. Gender presentation is how they wish to present their gender to the outside world. And it says, while biological sex and gender identity are the same for most people, this isn't the case for everyone. For example, some people may have male anatomy but identify as female, etc., etc. And so the important bit here, as highlighted, in my view, for the purposes of this video, is that this document by the Met Police acknowledges that there is a disparity between sex and gender identity. That in situations like this can lead to distressing and painful feelings called gender dysphoria. But in that case, I respectfully suggest that if one is subjected, let's say a woman is subjected to a more intimate more thorough intimate parts search by a biologically male but transgender woman officer with a gender recognition certificate, as is now picked up not just by the Met Police but by the British Transport Police, those women may well feel, and you can let me know your thoughts in the comments below, this is a democratic process of discussion, those women may well feel that they are being subjected to humiliating and degrading treatment. Because they are, according to science, they are being searched by a member of the opposite biological sex, because that cannot change. But that is exactly what is happening according to policies now being reported in police forces across the country. But what does the law say about all of this? Well, there's two ways of looking at this. First of all is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which sets out the basis of being intimately searched, as it says here, and this is under PACE 1984, Section 55 for intimate searches. And under subsection 7, a constable may not carry out an intimate search of a person of the opposite sex. And I think that is significant because when we look again at the document that describes the disparity between sex and gender identity, this, in the case of someone who experiences gender dysphoria, which is a recognized medical condition, this document recognizes that this can lead to distressing and painful feelings called gender dysphoria. I respectfully suggest that those women subjected to this sort of search by someone who is of the opposite biological sex may also have an experience which is distressing and uncomfortable. And if they do feel that way, then I would recommend that they object to the search, and I would like to think that most forces would be sensible, try to de-escalate the situation, and they would assign a different officer to conduct the search to avoid this situation from happening. But then that throws up all sorts of arguments as to whether that officer is being treated less favourably because of their gender identity, or as against the rights of the individual being searched, such as in this case a woman who is subject to an intimate body search. But that is not the only bit of law that is relevant here. As I mentioned, there is a significant case going to the UK Supreme Court on the 26th and 27th of November, just a few days away, to decide whether or not sex in the Equality Act has the ordinary biological meaning and whether that applies across the whole Act. This as against the Gender Recognition Act, which says that if somebody obtains a gender recognition certificate, then their sex is that of the sex in the GRC for all legal purposes. But obviously that causes significant problems throughout the rest of the Equality Act, if indeed sex means the same sex as in the GRC. There is a contradiction here, and not just a legal contradiction, but I respectfully suggest that this is a very real world common sense difference and disparity, to pick up the wording of the Met Police document, a disparity between what might be a legal definition and what is a very real definition to many people around the world. Now again, just for clarity, this video of mine here is not to tell anybody what to think. It's not even really to give you my views. And incidentally, if you do want my views, pop over to Black Belt Secrets, also linked below. That's where I give you my personal views. They are just my views. They're not intended to insult anybody, but they are my views. If you want those views, I try to avoid them here. But yeah, check out that, linked in the description below as well. It is just objective commentary on what the law is, what it says, what it means, what might happen if the law goes in favour of sex being recognized as that contained on the GRC as opposed to biological sex. It will mean that it is enshrined in law that anyone that has a GRC can conduct these searches, for example, and it would be unlawful discrimination to prevent them from doing so. That, in a very real world sense, may seem quite absurd. In a legal sense, there is a legal argument for it that it makes sense on a very technical legal level, but objectively this has very real world implications for everybody, and specifically women's rights in this particular case here, which is For Women Scotland, which is taking this case to the Supreme Court because they argue that sex should retain its ordinary meaning, which will, as they say, give a hugely powerful legal signal that policymakers and organisations need to recognise that sex is real. Women and men are two clearly separate groups with interests and needs that are not always the same. And again, that is different from gender identity, and again, it is different from gender dysphoria and all of the things that go along with that. But you may have gleaned from this that the charity Sex Matters has intervened because the stakes in this case are so high, hence my publication of it here to spread the word. So you can hop over to their website, I'll link it below. They say the stakes are high. The decision is pivotal for women's rights, freedom of expression, sound government in the UK. And this case will change the course of history. Sex Matters was given permission to intervene in this hearing in both written and oral submissions, which they will do so with counsel Ben Cooper, King's Counsel, and Scottish barrister David Welsh on day one of the hearing. The written submission argues that the correct statutory interpretation of the law is that Section 9(1) of the Gender Recognition Act, which says that the GRC changes the person's sex for all legal purposes, does not apply to the Equality Act. In other words, where the Equality Act is protecting sex discrimination, it is referring to biological sex. They say this is because the purpose of the Equality Act is to protect people against discrimination and harassment. Sex discrimination is not something that happens to people because they have a certificate, but because they are, or at least perceived to be, or associated with being male or female. The alternative interpretation of the Equality Act, which views sex as being purely administrative matter, not tied to bodies, creates nonsensical and illogical outcomes. Those are the arguments of Sex Matters that will be presented to the Supreme Court, and that will be decided in just a few days' time. And then all situations such as this one here, with transgender police officers conducting more thorough intimate parts searches of women, and other situations such as the recent Football Association debacle with banning a girl for asking a transgender person whether they were a man, and doubtless many other situations that will turn on the same interpretations and the same law. And one way or another, the Supreme Court will clarify the law on this, whether sex in the Equality Act refers to biological sex, and that will assist everybody. So as always, respectfully, please leave me your thoughts and comments in the box below. This video and the comment section is not for attacking other people. I don't condone that. But as I said, if you do like an open, frank and honest approach to the law and what's going on in the country and in the rest of the world, please do hit the like button. I'll give you time to do that now. Make sure you subscribe below. And as always, thank you for watching.